Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about something that is often overlooked, but it's the main reason why I wanted to start this channel in the first place, and that's talking about introverts and the value that they bring, specifically in the workplace. So, so let's start out with what an introvert is, and fundamentally, it's not something that is diagnosed or is treatable or a condition. An introvert is a personality trait, right? And the three main pieces that you could think of when you think about an introvert are preferring solitude, deep thinking, and being able to recharge in a quiet environment. And so there's a handful of other things you can probably think about, but why those three? And when we break down what an introvert is, when we think about preferring solitude and deep thinking, right, those two kind of go hand in hand. If you ever hear the term of, I just like being lost in my own thoughts, or I like being in my own thoughts, and that's because our personality traits um, move us towards a position of liking the ability to think and having our own time to think. And it's hard to do that when there's a lot of distraction going around in large social environments. And so being alone and being in our own thoughts helps us, right? Because we can think about a lot of things. We can do a lot of brainstorming. We can do conflict resolution. We can think about innovation, right? In those types of environments. And the third one is being able to recharge. And that's something that's very important to myself and many others in my life, is being able to be in a situation that might be a little uncomfortable or out of the norm for an introvert. Whether that's being at a large social event, that could be a party, it could be a wedding, right? Some of these things are like obligations that you have to go to. But at the end of the day, right, you need that place to go to, and that's typically your home or your room, and have that be that ability to just have quiet time and recharge. So those are the three main features. Let's talk about why introverts are highly valuable in a workplace with that understanding of a definition of an introvert personality trait. So those three pieces are empathy, right? Introverts have an enhanced ability to understand someone's feelings, and it's because of their ability to listen, right? So those two go hand in hand. The second one is our analytical skills. That's probably one of the reasons why I became an engineer, is being able to listen and being able to have deep thinking and have time for deep thinking, because that allows your brain to make a lot of connections internally and be able to think outside the box, so to speak, and maybe even come up with some solutions that have not been thought of before. And you arrive at those destinations in your own way. So having the analytical skills is highly valuable in almost any industry. And the last one is innovation, because introverts thrive in their own thoughts and thinking outside the box and being able to really internalize what they're hearing and maybe even what they're seeing if someone is presenting something, is because they can take all those pieces and work through it internally, right? And then that could lead to all forms of innovation in multiple industries that could benefit themselves and their career growth and their career projection. So now that we got those two covered, let's talk about a couple myths that are associated with introverts. And one of them, as I think would be probably the most widely used or widely assumed myth about introverts, is that we are all antisocial, and that's simply not the case. I'll say it here, and in many of my other videos that I'll post. Introverts love smaller groups, right? We're not antisocial, but it's if you connect the dots to what we had just talked about before, right? Deep thinking, preferring some solitude, being able to recharge in a quiet environment. This will show you why introverts are not antisocial, but why we need smaller groups, and that allows us to interact, right, and have deeper conversations, being able to have times of silence to think about what we want to say and how we want to respond, because we're really internalizing what we're hearing. And in smaller groups, it's easier to do that and take those pauses. The second piece is that being in smaller groups does not have an energy drain on introverts, right? We're allowed to stay engaged in the conversation, and we can benefit from being in that conversation and having those personal connections. And then the second one that we'll talk about in terms of myths for introverts is that we're unassertive. Is that because we're shy and maybe we don't want to say anything right away, that means that we couldn't be a good leader, right? We wouldn't make choices. But really what that means, and I've heard this before, is introverts have something called a quiet strength, right? And you may have heard that before too, or the silent champion was a term that's been used to describe myself before. But what that really means is you have a lot of power, and if people around you know you really well and understand what's going on in your head, especially if you're in a meeting or in a group project, and you need that time to internalize and think about things on a deeper level, and sometimes that's just you by yourself, or sometimes that's you in a really small group, or maybe even one-on-one. Actions are taken, decisions are made, and then outcomes are achieved from that. So being unassertive is definitely a myth when it comes to thinking about introverts in the workplace. So that next piece that comes hand in hand when we're talking about being in a workplace are our environments. At the very beginning, I mentioned solitude and being able to recharge in a quiet environment. But in the workplace, right, that's not always the case. But businesses and companies need to understand the different personality types that are going to be in the workplace, and how extroverted people are going to be in the same offices as introverted people. And we need different types of environments that foster community and relationship, and safety, and a culture that everyone wants to be a part of. So it could be something as simple as having large open spaces, right? That could be good for some personality types because there's people everywhere, they're easy to access. And then on other things, you can have offshoots of a large open space that could be like quiet rooms, or like nooks where there's a smaller table and only maybe a couple of chairs in the room. That kind of fosters that close knit, or maybe that may more of a closed off conversation or a tight knit group. So you can see how business could cater to different personality types just by the way a room is simply set up. So now I want to talk about a famous introvert, a self-proclaimed introvert, and that's J.K. Rowling. And so many of you know who that is. And if you don't, she's the one that wrote the Harry Potter series, and she came up with it in her head, right? I'm sure some of you have heard the story that she came up with the idea on a train ride, and her pen didn't work, and she couldn't bring herself to ask the person next to her for a pen. So what did she do? She internalized the story and thought about the beginning of Harry Potter in her head, and then had that entire story unfold while she was on the train ride. And you can see the type of success that she had after the fact. But in those beginning stages, right, she did a lot of that on her own, right, without a lot of help from a lot of other people. And that was because of her being introverted and preferred the solitude and the deep thinking that she could do on her own. So to wrap up, I want everyone to know that being an introvert or introversion is not a limitation, right? And it's actually a strength. And some of the strengths that we talked about today were empathy, analytical thinking or analytical skills, and innovation, right? And so there's room in the workplace to succeed alongside extroverts, right? And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means that we excel at different things. And the point of this video was not really to talk about extroverts, but really to focus on introverts and the value that they bring to the workplace. So let me know in the comments below some situations that you may have been in that actually turned out to be positive, or that may have led to a promotion or career advancement or making a connection at a networking event. And it was all due to you basically harnessing your introverted skills. And I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. So please like and subscribe the video, and then you'll be hearing from me soon on the next one. Thanks. Bye.